Hi everybody and welcome back to Kimbo's Comfort Kitchen, and today we're going to do just a basic technique tutorial on how to properly bread chicken breasts. It's not that complicated, but if you don't do it right, it can be both disastrous and it'll look like crap, not to mention what it's going to taste like. But this technique I'm going to show you today is standard, used in most kitchens. The only difference is that I have such a small kitchen I've had to adapt as usual. So I'm going to show you how to do this when you have very limited space and come out with an outstanding product from start to finish. So let's get going. So let's get going. First thing we have to do with the chicken breast is we need to flatten it. So I've just got some wax paper. You can use parchment paper. I prefer parchment, but I'm short of parchment right now. So there we go. And don't use this side because this will just destroy the paper, and it's more for tenderizing, and this is just for flattening. Not my favorite mallet, but it's a great way to get out your aggression. It's a very delicate operation. You have to be very careful. And that's one large breast. So that's pretty even. And when you're hammering this out, oops, you want to make sure that it's relatively even thickness, like that. Okay, that's a big piece. I'm probably going to cut that in half and when I bread it, because these are rather large chicken breasts, very large chicken breasts. But there you have it. Pretty simple. And on to the next. Alright, so given that I have a really tiny kitchen, as I've mentioned before, normally in a larger kitchen, if you had a lot of space, you'd set up a proper station where you'd have a plate with flour, you have a bowl with your egg, your chicken on that side, and then you'd have your breadcrumbs or your panko on the last part, and you just go boom, 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 making sure to only use one hand so that you don't get the other hand all gooey and stuck. But we're not going to do that because, as I mentioned, I have a really tiny kitchen. So here's some of the things that are crucial. First of all, I've got 6 pieces of chicken that I'm doing, and I know it's kind of awkward to show you on the camera here, but just give this a rough whisk. Not too much, because you don't want a lot of air incorporated into this. So you can see I'm using a very fancy technique called the back and forth. There, or I could do the 8, but that doesn't work. So no, here we go. So there's my egg, and I've patted dry the chicken. And oh yeah, one of the things out too is that a lot of times people put all the seasoning in the panko when they're doing the breading. I find that a lot of it gets lost, so I prefer actually just to season directly onto the chicken itself. But just a little salt and pepper. Again, people forget to season their food, but I found this is probably the most efficacious. So I've dried this off, and I'm going to take these 3, and I'm going to season the other side. Okay. A little bit of salt. And once I've done that, given, as I mentioned, the limited space, I can't really set up a proper dredging station. So what I'm doing is I'm just reusing the same plate, drying it off first before I do anything, and I'm going to do this all over again. It's not rocket surgery. And a little seasoning. You'll notice that I'm using my left hand to do this, and my right hand is for the dry goods, such as seasoning. Make sure you get rid of the excess flour. Now, what I like to do is I'm going to wait 5 minutes. Not even, I'm going to wait a couple minutes. And I'm just going to run it through this again, just to give it an extra coat of flour before I dredge it in the egg. And I'll show you what's next. Alright, so now I'm just going to dredge this in the egg. Give it a good one and let all the excess come off, or most of it, like that. And it's that simple. And I'm going to do that with all these pieces. Same weight. There you go. And then once I've done all of them, I'm going to put this in the fridge uncovered for about at least half an hour. I like it to set in the fridge before we go on to the next step. Alright then, so let's get going. I've been heating the oil. I'm going to throw a little bit of water there. And I've got it at about 3/4 heat. And that seems about right. I've already done one breaded chicken piece already for my mom that I cooked earlier. That's why the brown flecks are in there. But now I'm going to put 3 pieces in here. Don't crowd the pan. And the irony here is that you're looking at this going, wow, that's a lot of oil. And on one hand it is, but the reality is that if I use just a little bit of oil, the temp would have dropped substantially and a lot of that oil would get absorbed into the breadcrumbs and the crust and you'd end up with a pretty greasy piece of chicken. So by doing this, the ambient temperature doesn't drop as much as it normally would, and this is going to brown a lot faster. And as I said, don't crowd this. I've preheated the oven to 210 Fahrenheit or just slightly below 100 Celsius. And as soon as it starts to brown, I'm going to flip this. And the idea is not to cook this all the way through. I just want to form a crust on this. And once that's happened, I'm going to put this in the oven and we're going to let that sit for another 10 to 12 minutes while I'm doing other things in my little tiny kitchen. So I'll be back in a sec. Okay, so this has been in for about 3 minutes, maybe 4. I go by color more than timing. And I have now, these are not cooked through, but I'm going to drain these and put them in the oven while I do the next 2 pieces to finish it all off, which gives me time to do my potatoes, which is another recipe, but you get the idea. Alright, so the chicken's been done. It's been in the oven for about 12 minutes. And I'm going to show you exactly what the result is here. Now this is, you would think being the fact that it's, God, that looks good. I'll have that later. I'll lift this off and you can see there's almost no grease. And what's amazing about this is when you cut this open, do you see how juicy that is? I mean, that is bloody amazing. You normally never get that unless you do it this way. So this is going to be juicy, crispy at the same time. And let's plate. I'm going to show you the finished product afterwards. Okay, so I think I've got everything together here. Let's start with, this by the way is mayo with liquid smoke. So it's a smoked mayo, which goes spectacularly with this dish. And I'm going to pull out the chicken, which, as I mentioned earlier, is super juicy. I don't mean kind of juicy, I mean super juicy. And I'm going to turn the oven off. I've got a couple more pieces left, which I'm going to make sandwiches out of. But here we go. So that's that. And now, whether you're watching the roast potatoes, pan fry roast potato recipe, or if you're watching the breaded chicken breast recipe, you can see how this all comes together. And I did both of these simultaneously. It wasn't that difficult. And the whole thing took about, well, if I wasn't filming, the whole thing would take about 30 minutes. And I'm going to start a series on 30-minute meals, sort of as an homage to Jamie Oliver, because I really liked what he did there. But sometimes, you know, we just don't have all that equipment that everybody else has. So this is a tiny kitchen recipe, and you can make it for 2, you can make it for 6. It makes it a little bit more difficult, but now you get the idea. So I've got sweet kale salad with Asian dressing, pan roasted potatoes, and chicken, which is, I tell you, what you saw when I cut it open earlier, if you were watching that recipe, super tasty. And smoked mayo. This is a meal, and it's really easy. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And do me a favor and subscribe. Thanks.